Good morning to everybody out there. At least it is here in the Philippines. And since I'm in the Philippines, I guess I should say magandang umaga sa inyong lahat, which is good morning. In this video, I want to look at some configurations for media centers, home theaters, media server, media client sort of things. I want to start with the simple stuff as it's just a single box, a single unit, and then move on to some networking ideas and things like that. There are a lot of flavors of media center type software. We'll talk about a couple of them. I've only got experience with a few of them, but there are a lot of them out there. And sometimes it can be a bit confusing, especially a lot of times when some of them are spoken of in the same breath. Prime example would be Plex and Kodi, which we'll talk about. My goal for you, at least with this video, is to familiarize yourself with what a media center is. Well, you should probably know what one is already, but some of the complexities or simplicities around it, depending on how you want to approach it. Understand the options, understand the different configurations. You get that out of this, that'd be great. So a media center is a common use for a spare PC or even for your normal PC. Basically, as far as we're concerned for this video, a media center is a personal computer or a spare PC that's set up to handle all your media and stream it to your media center, well, your media theater, home theater setup. How about that? Your TV, your sound system, all that stuff. And there's a couple of different ways you can approach this. Like I say, we'll start with the standalone, which is just a single entity sort of thing, and then we'll go to some more network solutions, which you could use with multiple devices. Well, not really relevant to this conversation. I thought I'd bring this up because, well, people are beginning to ditch streaming services. I've seen a few articles and stuff about this. I sort of understand it. My son subscribed to, I think, 4 or 5 different streaming services, and it's not cheap. It's probably more expensive than when I actually was using cable. And I think a lot of people are inspired by the cord cutters of yesteryear, and well, this year too. Now they're starting to do it with the streaming services. You want your own private media server where you're not bombarded with commercials or ever increasing, spiraling out of control prices, corporate greed, copyright holder greed, that sort of thing. So let's talk about media centers, from the simple to the complex. So one thing I need to say up front, this is not going to be a technological discussion. Well, you're talking about computers, so it sort of has to be technical, but I'm not going to dive into packaging, compression, formats, stuff like that. I'm going to keep it at the higher level. But I do want to say, as an example of some of the confusion a lot of people see, I want to talk about this Plex Kodi example I mentioned earlier. So this is an apples and oranges sort of thing. Plex and Kodi have similar interfaces that do similar things, but once you get beyond the interface, there are totally different software packages with different ways of doing things, and they're not interchangeable. So a lot of times I see people compare Plex and Kodi, and it's like, why? I mean, yeah, the interfaces are similar, but what they do is different, or I should say the way they do it is different. We'll hit on that as we talk about this. I do want to say I will be mentioning several media applications, computer operating systems. A lot of them I'm not going to be familiar with, and I'll just gloss over the ones I am familiar with, like VLC, Kodi, Plex, Linux, Windows. Boy, I don't think there was an iTunes last time I used a Mac. Anyways, The focus here is more of a high-level sort of thing. When you're planning how you want to set things up, and then you can dig into the technical details after you have an idea of what you want to do and why you want to do it. So let's get to it. So the dead simple solution is this standalone. And this could be super simple. I'm showing here a computing box of some sort hooked to a TV. If your TV is capable or your media device is capable, you can technically plug a external hard drive directly in, and you have your media center there if it has the capabilities. But assuming you're using a separate box, standalone is the simplest way. So you have a computer box. It has an operating system of some sort, whatever one you're using. I'm using Linux. You could be using Windows. I guess you could be using Mac. Like I say, it's been years since I used a Mac. So yeah, they lost me early on with their, I'm going to do a tangent here. I shouldn't, but I am. What lost me for Mac, I remember back in the Mac Plus days, and then they went to the Classic, and they changed the serial port to the DIN connector because, well, just to me, it was a money grab. Everybody was making peripherals with the serial port and not the DIN connector, and then boom, on the Mac Classic, you had to buy Mac stuff, and Mac stuff's expensive. But yeah, again, get off the soapbox here, okay? Anyway, you have a computer, you have a operating system, you have a storage drive, and then you have a media player of some sort. All your media, your videos, pictures, music, what have you, is located on this computer. And I should mention, as we get further on, I'm going to stop talking about the operating system, just assume it's there. But this is the simplest way, and this is Kodi's a prime example of this sort of system. It's a media player interface. It's a standalone. Kodi is a standalone program, so that's an important thing to remember, especially when comparing it to some of the other applications it gets compared to. Another example would be something like VLC. VLC is actually available, I think, on pretty much every platform, even Macintosh. Windows Media Player, iTunes. I mean, yes, you can say some of these, in fact, all of these will use a network connection if you want them to, but in theory, all of these should be able to just play your local files without a network connection. I think while iTunes can do that, it's going to sort of demand it. Again, with the new Windows 11, Windows Media Player, yeah, you're sort of stuck with the Microsoft account, so. But these programs and a lot of others, Dragon, Clementine, I know the ones, Amarok, I know the ones on Linux, but anyway, these, Winamp, can't forget Winamp. These are local. The music has to be stored on the box they're on, at least in the setup we're talking about here, and then they play that directly to your media, your home theater system. So that's basically your standalone system. It's the simplest, easiest to set up. It's the least flexible for a variety of reasons, but you may or may not need the additional flexibility. So just for the ones I'm using right now, this is Kodi. It's in windowed mode instead of full screen mode. You can see, like, down the left-hand side, you have movies, music, add-ons, pictures, videos. There's a lot of other things that go in this menu. You can make it as long or short as you want. You got some settings. You got a search. Here in the music category, you got like genre, artist, albums, singles, songs. There's a bunch of different ways to sort and look at things. Recently played albums, recently added albums. Again, one of the things, like a lot of the more advanced media players do, is Kodi has a database of some sort. Some media players use a flat file, which is basically just a text file, and others just use a full-fledged database. Kodi, I believe, uses SQLite. But it can be set up to use like Maria or MariaDB or MySQL or something like that. But it knows what, it tracks when you add things, it tracks what you've played, it displays additional information. Now, on the flip side, we have something like VLC here, which has a much simpler looking interface. You can see here it's, I mean, it will do a media library, but this is not really, it doesn't really track a lot of stuff for you. A media library just means that you've pointed the media player to a folder and it remembers where that folder is. You can also see on this one on the left hand, you got my videos, my music, my pictures. These are all in your home folder usually, and you've got some other devices and local network stuff. But if you point it to someplace on your computer, it's a basic local play. So yeah, that's VLC. You can see the difference in the interface between it and Kodi, even though Kodi has a lot more advanced functions, but they basically both do the same things. They play media. Okay, let's step this up a little bit. Remember how I pointed out you had network interfaces? Well, you can take your media library and you can put it on a separate computer. If your media player generates a database and your media player is capable, you can put that on a separate computer too and communicate via network protocols. Why might you want to do this? Well, you might want to be accessing your media files from a different device with a different media player. Again, network capable, then you can point it at the same file server. And this is basically a file server that we're pointing at, not a media server. And we'll talk about that in the next level of complication. Your media player on your computer hooked up to your home theater is still doing all the work. It's just pulling the data across the internet. Well, no, it's pulling the data across your LAN, your local area network. Technically, with a VPN, Tailscale, Cloudflare tunnels, you can pull it through the internet too, but that's a whole other video on how to do that. So local area network, LAN, LAN. So we have a file server, and like I say, it's set up to share files with other systems, or computer hooked up to our home theater is a client, and we've got several network protocols you can use. It just depends on the media player you're using and what it can use. For example, going back to Kodi, it recognizes FTP or file transfer protocol. Technically, it also recognizes SSTP, FTP, secure file transfer protocol. It also recognizes SMB or CIFS, I think was the old term. This is the standard Windows network sharing sort of protocol where if you work any place that uses Windows and you use external drives from your computer, they're mounted via SMB, and they show up as a drive letter and they're as a mount point. NFS is network file system. This is the Unix/Linux native system. Some things it does better than SMB, some things not so much. If you're in a Linux device, if you're a total Linux Unix environment, NFS is probably better. If you're dealing with Windows or even with Macs, SMB is, well, actually, since Macs run on Unix, that one doesn't count. Used to, not anymore. But if you're using Windows or say Android devices or things like that, SMB might be the better. You can also do SSH or Secure Shell, Secure Copy. WebDAV is another one. WebDAV is a big one used by the Nextcloud personal cloud application, where you can put all your media on your personal cloud, and then Kodi could read it over WebDAV. HTTP, well, technically WebDAV is part of HTTP, but again, the principle is the same. Your information's on a server, your media player that does all the work still on a client, and they talk across your local area network. So this is basically the next level of complexity. And again, the reason you want to do this maybe is you want to have multiple devices accessing your media files. That's probably the big reason. Okay, the next level of complexity. Let's talk client-server, server-client relationship, where you have two different applications. On your server, a separate PC somewhere on your network, you have your media server, you have your media library, you have your media database. Again, well, not again, but technically your media library and your media database could be on another server, so you could have two servers, but we're just showing here on one. And on your client computer, you have a media client. And doing things this way allows you to use a much lower power computer, I guess would be a way of putting it, or not as resource heavy computer as your client hooked to your home theater. Your media server does a lot of the work, streaming, transcoding, things like that. And your media client just takes what the media server sends it and presents it to you. Your media client usually has an interface that allows you to control the server in some manner. A prime example of this is Plex. Remember I said Kodi and Plex is different? Kodi standalone, Plex client server. You have a Plex server, and then you load a Plex application, which is a Plex client on your phone, on your computer hooked to your media center, and you can access them both. You can access them at the same time. This is the big advantage of Plex over Kodi. I mean, you can set Kodi up to read from a file server, but Plex actually uses a full-blown media server and a media client. Other applications, Jellyfin, Subsonic, Ampache, that's probably one you haven't heard of, but I've used before. And all these applications, you can actually load a media client, like say the Plex app in this case, or Plex, Jellyfin, and I believe Subsonic also and Ampache also allow you to use a web browser on your computer as the client, which is kind of cool. Now, one thing I'll say about Plex, and I don't want to get too hot on Plex because they raised their prices recently again. They're getting too commercialized, but one thing I will say about Plex is they have the Plex Pass, and this is a cool feature, especially if your ISP sticks you behind a carrier-grade network address translation protocol, or CGNAT, which means you don't have a public IP address. With the Plex Pass and a Plex server, your media server running Plex constantly pings a keep alive connection through your ISP's CGNAT to a Plex server somewhere out in the internet. And instead of trying to connect directly to your media server, you go through the Plex server, which connects. There's a whole reason this works. There's reasons this works, which I probably should go into a CGNAT again in a separate video. I haven't talked about that for a while. In fact, I don't think I've ever done a video on CGNAT. Maybe I should do one. But again, you may not be able to get out. Plex has its own sort of VPN tunneling, whatever you want to call it, built in. Whereas if you were using something like Jellyfin or Subsonic or even Ampache, you would have to add your own sort of tunneling to get through the CGNAT. So that's one other advantage of Plex. But as I said, Plex is getting way too commercialized. Their prices keep going up. I remember I do have a Plex Pass. You decide to go with Plex and use a Plex Pass, I highly recommend just skipping the monthly fee and getting a lifetime. And although the prices basically doubled on that last year, but yeah, I like the system. I just don't like how commercial and how much other stuff Plex is throwing in there now. So yeah, but again, at the higher end, you've got media server, file server. You got media server, media client, or server client, client server relationship is the high end, and this is where you do a lot of the fancier stuff. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this up. That was my short introduction to media centers. I'm hoping it helps people. I was trying to define the difference between the different types of applications out there and the different types of setups, because when people talk about media servers, they could leave a lot of this in the, or they could just not mention it. So I wanted to focus on some of these things, like I say, like standalone file server, using a file server, using an actual media server, things like that. So I'm hoping you got some understanding out of this. I'm also hoping that most of the construction up in my office will be done next week, and I can move back up there instead of down here in the family room, but maybe. We'll see. Maybe for the next video. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Yeah, subscribe. That always helps. And I will see you next time around, okay?